Hey guys, Paul here. So, today we're going to talk about pure Yu-Gi-Oh decks, the only correct way to play Yu-Gi-Oh. I'm kidding, obviously, being sarcastic, but I am something of a Yu-Gi-Oh purist. I really like building and playing Yu-Gi-Oh decks and archetypes sort of as Konami intended, so to speak. Now, it's not a perfect way to run them. In fact, this video is going to be sort of me reflecting on the benefits and the downsides to doing so, but it is just a way that I've gotten more and more into playing in recent years. So by that I mean, I'll pick my favorite archetype and I will just run it, as pure as possible. I like to try to avoid running generic extra deck monsters sometimes. I like to avoid running super powerful unrelated staples. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but for me, it's just kind of a fun, interesting challenge. So here are some of the benefits, and then I'll get into some of the downsides. So first of all, I really like it for the immersion. So when I play a Yu-Gi-Oh deck, I like to kind of feel like I am the person commanding the deck. I'm sort of immersing myself into the deck. If I'm playing against, if I'm playing with like Plunder Patrol, then I'm a pirate who is sort of boarding ships. If I'm playing Rika, I'm a plant princess. I don't know. But either way, whenever I play a deck, I like to kind of see myself as part of the archetype almost. It's just a mental thing. It really has nothing to do with gameplay. It's just sort of silly and cringe, but I think it's cool. Now, for the actual more meaningful ones, let's talk about the benefits that you get for like gameplay wise. I think learning is a big one. So when you play a deck pure, it's a great way to actually learn the archetype. I do it especially when there's an archetype that's like sort of new and does not have all of its like best support cards out yet. I'll just play it pure, run like, 3 copies of every single card, right? And just sort of play it as Konami intended because I feel like I get to learn a lot about what the intended design of the deck was. Even if that's not actually how it's going to necessarily end up being played in the competitive scene, it's sort of fun because you see lots of niche little interactions and sort of you get to see how like an engine is supposed to like how it's supposed to get started, how it's supposed to recycle, how it can like handle different threats, and sort of a lot of cards work really intuitively when they're actually like then they're like in the space that they were supposed to be in. So a lot of decks in Yu-Gi-Oh, will oftentimes get like trimmed down to just their engine, right? You think about maybe the adventure token engine, right? Typically people are just going to be running like Ride of Aramesir and Water Princess and like one Dracoback and one Griffin Rider or whatever. And in those cases, you'll see that aspect of the deck, but you won't get to actually see all the different equip spells, all the different field spells, the other monsters that can do things like Illegal Night and that sort of thing. So you get to sort of see those aspects of the deck. Also, your engines typically last a little bit longer when you play pure decks. So usually if you're, running a trimmed down version of an engine, you might only have like, let's say 3 copies of one card and then like 1 copy of another, right? So it's just intended to be like 3 of this because when you summon it, it searches this thing and then you can link off. Like there's plenty of engines that fit that exact description. I like to run decks where you get to have multiple copies of cards that might normally be run at one because it means that in a grindier game you get to see access to those cards and you might actually find that your deck is stronger for it because unlike maybe the hybrid or the pile deck or something that an engine got thrown into, an archetype deck tends to last longer if the game gets past like turn 5, turn 6, turn 7, things like that. Also, there are a lot of really fun interactions that your opponent just won't usually see coming when you get to play these pure decks. So usually most decks will have like the strong element of it, but like in the adventure token example, a lot of people have no clue what the other adventure token spells and traps do. It's not to say that they're really good because they're not, but if you run them, your opponent is going to have to read all that stuff and figure it out on the fly, and typically they're not going to be able to, and you can get a lot of advantages just by kind of catching your opponent off guard. Now, competitively, some people might say that's not really an advantage that you should be banking on winning with, like in a YCS or even like a regional, and that's true, but I think that, at locals and stuff, there's nothing more fun than catching people off guard because they just did not really read your cards, or they didn't know about sort of a niche interaction that your deck can only really do because you're running that one weird battle trap card that every archetype tends to get, or that one card that can like recycle from grave, or just something kind of strange like that. So that's some of the stuff that I really like seeing. Another part is, I've got notes here in case you couldn't tell. It's fun to sort of run my themed boss monsters because they do tend to be really strong. Obviously, generic extra deck monsters like, Barone and stuff like that tend to kind of outshine. Pure boss monsters. That's something I don't really like that much about Yu-Gi-Oh! At times, but I like to be the guy who runs, Therion Irregular, right? Or making Borland Dragon in a pure rocket deck and getting like the full value out of it, or all the different Boral monsters, like not just, that, but Boral Sword, Boral Guard, even the very first one was a Boral Load. Like I play all of them. Like when I play like a pure rocket deck, that's really fun for me. Same with generators. I like to run like one of each generator in my generator deck sometimes. A few of them just aren't really very good. But I like to run all these different cards because for me it feels more fun that way. Now here's the downsides, because it ain't perfect. So I think that the biggest downside to running these pure decks is that you are missing out on good staples usually. Sometimes if you're the type of person who wants to see, like, can my deck out this problematic other field using its in archetype only things? No? Well, then I guess this is a loss, right? Not every deck can handle every other deck. Currently in Master Duel, for instance, Arise Heart's out, and some decks just can't really out Arise Heart in Engine. They have to utilize cards like Book of Eclipse, cards like Raigeki, just something, anything that can, get rid of it, a Kaiju, whatever. And I don't think that those necessarily make your deck unpure, like to run, staple spells. That doesn't really take away from it, but it just sort of depends. I think another thing too that can be a bit of a problem is that these decks are in some cases more consistent, in some cases a little brickier. So like more consistent in that you'll be seeing your engine pieces a lot and they usually last a lot longer, like I said, but they are sometimes a little bit brickier because you are running usually like the bad cards, so to speak. For instance, for me right now, I'm playing Rescue Ace, and I run the, Rescue Ace Monitor, which searches the trap cards, and I like that card, right? It's not usually run because most people feel like the traps aren't, like, searching the traps isn't very valuable because, like, Turbulence is usually going to get them. Rescue Ace talk if you don't know. Just the point is, there are usually going to be cards in your deck that are useful, like when your engine's working and all that stuff, but aren't really great to necessarily open with, especially like alone. So that can sometimes be a bit of a problem with like running your pure deck. And then I think last but not least, let's face it, you're missing out on some creativity and originality aspects, right? Like merging decks together, it could be argued to also be where the fun in Yu-Gi-Oh lies, right? Like, combining two decks or three decks or just multiple different engines and stuff is creativity. It's you could call it maybe skill expression to some degree, right? Like you are not just running Konami's sort of cookie cutter thing that they made for you, but rather you are, taking bits and pieces and making a deck that is, in many cases, all your own. And that's really cool. It's also worth noting, of course, too, that, Konami, I think, in this kind of shift towards archetypes, has tried to box players in a lot more, and it can make Yu-Gi-Oh a little bit more accessible in some ways. You can just pick an archetype and go with it, but it could also maybe be seen as a little bit more boring, and so I think that's just something that's worth kind of talking about as well. So I want to know from you guys, what do you prefer? Do you like playing your decks more pure? Do you prefer to build different hybrids and kind of like see what you can do, push the limits, raise the ceiling? There's not like a right or wrong way to do it, really. I guess in tournaments there's probably a right way, but in terms of just enjoyment of Yu-Gi-Oh, it's really up to you. Anyways, that's going to be it. I'll see you guys in the next one. Looking forward to reading your comments. Pass turn.